From the cradle to the grave, you are measured against the yardstick of average, judged according to how closely you approximate it or how far you are able to exceed it. A modern conception of the average person is not a mathematical truth, but a human invention, created a century and a half ago by two European scientists, Quetelet and Galton, to solve the social problems of their era. It's what Todd Rose speaks about in his bestseller, End of Average. Juliana Jackson has dug deep into the minds of data analytics leaders, people that work every day with measurements and metrics, to uncover what mental models they have built to help them understand the world. Join us while we focus on the stories of data analytics leaders and how they use mental models to challenge others to think differently by deviating from conventional approaches.
We are back with another episode of Standard Deviation Podcast, and I have a very special guest here today, and that is Ben Labay, the managing director of Speero. And I'm super excited to talk to him today about very geeky, esoteric stuff. So, welcome, Ben.
Yeah, excited to be here, Juliana, and I'm always happy and eager to geek out. I love it. Let's geek.
You, Pep, and Leo are the only people that say my name right. So, prior to you being a part of CXL, and now you're running Speero for more than a year, I think close to 2 years that you're running Speero. I know you have worked in academics and specifically in evolutionary behavior research. And I know that because I took your course, Voice of the Customer Data on CXL. So, I want you to tell me more about that period of your life. What was exactly that you were doing?
Yeah, my undergraduate degree is in evolutionary behavior, so that's definitely the underpinning. So not it's kind of a bent on biology, focused on evolution, but there's a lot of psychology, even anthropology, kind of mixed in there. And then after that, I've got a master's degree in aquatic resources and biostatistics. And what I was doing it through in my academic career, so 10 years, doing research, staff scientist, scientist researcher over at University of Texas here in Austin. I was doing research with fish data. So I was using fish as a way to model and ask questions about the environment. So water health, climate health. Some examples of it would be using kind of water and fish data to do climate modeling and looking at distributions of these populations and how they might shift under different IPCC scenarios and emission scenarios. And I've got a lot of published academic literature, Google Scholar profile, ResearchGate profile, with a bunch of my old historic stuff, if you want to geek out there and see some of the stuff that I've published. A lot of the species distribution modeling. So looking at, for example, in Texas here, we've got a lot of drilling for oil. And there's a lot of oil company lawyers that will get together in rooms and along with like modelers like myself and conservationists and decide like, how can we lay a bunch of pipe? How can we develop a bunch of oil fields and not harm this species of lizard or turtle or whatever that is about to get onto the endangered species list? So working with the federal government, Department of Interior, doing environmental species designation management of a lot of this type of stuff. So what you're working on there with that problem is modeling. So there's a lot of I was doing mathematical, machine learning modeling back in 2010. There's a lot of data. So it's a big data problem. And that I think is the biggest focus there of understanding what data is, what it's not, how to use it, what are the patterns in data and stuff like that. And then there's the behavioral side of things, which is the evolutionary responses of populations, not only individuals, but populations to different stressors of the environment. Anyway, a bunch of ramble there, but that kind of gives you a bunch of keywords and phrases and activity stuff that I was messing with for about 10 years.
It's so exciting and it's such a huge difference. I mean, it's a difference in terms of terms and terminology, but at the same time you're still studying behaviors, and you're still studying evolution, and you're still studying perceptions and different things like that. But it's a huge 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 at least from a terminology perspective, change. So you mentioned that you were working with a lot of data, and like I guess like data and science are all about helping you make better decisions and decision support. And that's what research is aiming to help you, right? Like to help you make better decisions. So since you studied evolutionary behavior in animals, are there some like primal mental models that we share with animals?
Yeah, I go back to that point around data, like the idea of understanding data, what it is, what it's not, different types of data, categories of data. With regards to the mental models, I do have a bunch of mental model stuff. I presented them in the course, and I love mental models. It's almost like a lattice work or framework in which you can pen your ideas on. And when you have that lattice work and you keep working on it, it becomes more and more clear and defined in your head. So you're able to like grab from those mental models and make connections, connect the dots a lot more explicitly. So, I mean, I don't know about mental models with regard that we share with animals, but I do have the ways in which we, I mean, I guess I do. Like there's one in which the way that we process data. So data processing is really interesting. I did a bunch of eye tracking research for a long time, for like a year. The first year with CXL, we did all this custom research, and we were doing a lot of this eye tracking stuff. And that's a data information processing problem. So when you look at a website, for example, you first sort of react to it subconsciously, and you're not even cognizant of your reaction, and it's your deep brain that's there. It's that the system one versus system two that Daniel Kahneman popularized. We had the data on where people were looking, how different versions of a website or hero image would affect their eyes and stuff like this. But then we always did follow-up surveys. So after they experienced, different versions or something like that, or what did they notice? What was their primary reaction to the content, etc. By the way, a lot of that work is the underpinnings how PEP was inspired to create Winter, by the way that we processed users and it got the information back and used panels and had all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'm going to take
I
credit.
did not know that.
I'm going to take credit for some of the Winter. So anyway, I would always do surveys after, because what you would find out is that like what people notice and then what they report back to notice are two totally different things. So there's like the information step of recall, or you're able to recall what you processed. So yeah, there's some mental model stuff in there as well. But anyway, I rambled too long on that question maybe.
I think it's awesome. And the reason why I was asking you about primal mental models is like, I think one of them that we share, with animals is survival. Like we have to, we have to survive, like just the primal ones. But moving into like, and for who's watching this and sees me, I am reading this question because I want to make sure I ask it right. And for who's ever listening, I am not reading the question. So I read that we have like two factors in our genetic coding, in particular, that affect our behaviors and interpretation of events. So basically, as a group, and this is something that is like known for a lot of people, like we share an identity with the group where the identity is sustained by collaboration and empathy, altruism. But we also, when we belong into a group, it's something very delicate and vulnerable for us because we don't want any changes to the group or any threats coming to the group. However, at the same time, as humans, right, we have very rooted in our biological code, this desire to explore new opportunities, new people, new groups. So I know I'm oversimplifying this, but like, are we really like such a walking contradiction?
Yeah,
What
I
are
think
your thoughts?
on that question, two things come to mind, or I guess two things that I'm influenced by more recently than like behavioral evolutionary studies and stuff that I've done in the past. And that's, I mean, the works of like Naval Harari in his book Sapiens that speaks to why we collaborate, why we are, the benefits that we get from cooperation are, there's evolutionary underpinnings of it. If we're able to cooperate through mechanisms of fiction, actually, then we're able to create bigger groups to then dominate and take over other groups. Like that's the one part of like the evolutionary underpinning of the trait of trust and cooperation. But then at the same time, there's like the other thing that comes to mind with this question is the work of Jordan Peterson, and how he writes a lot about, or talks a lot about, the need, sort of the lottery system of creative individuals, where, if you're creative and you're an artist and you're reaching out and you're exploring, 99 times out of 100 you're going to fail, but that one time that you don't fail, you're going to blow up, and you're going to be the next Elon Musk, or you're going to be Steve Jobs, or you're going to just really take over the world. So most of the time you're going to do something that is just out of pocket, and you might be ostracized for it. You might be in the out group for it, what you do. But 1 out of 100, you're going to do something that humanity will value so much, and it will advance humanity. And that's a lot of the Jordan Peterson dialogues that he goes into, a lot of that kind of stuff. So I think, 80% of us is like, we need to cooperate, we need to be part of the group, we need to fit in. But then there's a portion of the spectrum here, right? There's a spectrum of this kind of trait of like, do you want to fit in versus do you want to be an outcast and create and explore and all that kind of stuff. And so, and I've already referenced the evolutionary underpinnings of it all, right? Like all of our cognitive biases and ways of working, and what creates successful individuals now is not what our traits and behaviors is not what created successful individuals in the past, or and it might not be what creates successful individuals in the future. And so the underlying thing here is the idiosyncratic nature of our traits. Like we vary, and that
Right.
is the currency of evolution, is the variation. And so that is what evolution grabs onto. When the environment changes, the part of that normal curve that fits the environment will expand and be now the hill on that curve, so to speak.
You just entered with this something that I didn't plan to ask you, but now I will ask you. Like, you entered something that I'm geeking out about so much. So I read this book like 2 times called The End of Average, written by Todd Rose. Mind blown.
Hmm.
Because of that book, I started this podcast to geek about averages and about standardization and about individuality. So, going back to what you were saying, back in, I guess, in the 18th century, it was this Belgian scientist called Quetelet and Adolphe Quetelet, who's the one that came up with the average man, the concept of the average man. And then after Quetelet did this, he was basically calculating everybody based on this ideal person. And if you were falling under average, you were an error or a deviation. And you were on top of average, you were still an error or a deviation. Like, he just wanted averages. Like, everyone was calculated based on that average man. And then some years later, one of his fans, Francis Galton, came up with the concept of the eminent and the mediocre. So these two things are the ones that are still ingrained in our society so much. Like, he was saying, like, okay, Quetelet is right, but if you're falling on top of average, you're an eminent. So based on those models, we had the Taylorism, which basically taught people how to work in a factory. Like, the whole factory concept is based on the work of these two guys. And then the factory mindset went into schools and to colleges. And basically, we are standardized from the cradle to the grave. Like, all our life is already thought of. So I just like want to ask you about this. Like, I didn't plan this, but how do you think we are encouraging today people to just get out of the standardization? Because we are still affected by it when we make decisions, when we hire people, when we choose to go in relationships with people. We're looking for that, common thing. And do you feel like, for instance, if you think about education, because we both like education, the kids that are being born today or like 5, 10 years ago, they're not born in the same world as we are born, in a very analog world. They're born in a digital world. So the way schools work right now, they prepare these kids for a future that doesn't exist anymore. And they're also graded for, things that do not exist anymore. Like, what are your thoughts about how kids today are being, I guess, held accountable to some past averages, and they're not given chances to be, unique and different? It's
Yeah.
a loaded question.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very luxurious question, I will say. Like there's very in the sense of, if we think about, like, I think about my kids, I got two boys. Like, I have the
Nice.
luxury of thinking about, do I put them in a public school or maybe I homeschool them? And this would speak to a solution to the problem that you're proposing. And that's why I say it's a very luxurious question. So not everyone has the luxury of thinking about the solutions to this. I heard this quote yesterday, Juliana. I'm not joking. That we were talking about education. I was talking about education with somebody, and they said that in school, in public school, the model is that we want to fill buckets. We're trying to fill the bucket of a child when we really should be lighting up in education. And so that was a cool mental model for understanding the difference between what you're saying. So filling buckets versus lighting fires. I think, I think when there was like a Montessori preschool one of my boys went to for a little bit, and they had kind of this mentality of like letting them getting into whatever they want to play with versus like, this is the strict curriculum. Yeah. So I think right now the strict curriculum is less important than the socialization aspect of some of our, K through 12 in the US K through 12 education systems. Yeah, 100%. I think, it's also a luxurious problem in the sense of, in question, in the sense that, more and more as robots, so to speak, are automating our world, we're all able to be artists. We're all able to be artists in whatever we do. And I think that's when it'll be more and more important to light these fires. And as we're not the robots, as we don't need to have rote memorization be one of our ways of learning, that is a skill of the way that we're learning. We don't need that anymore. We've got Google. So we've got robots to do that for us, right? So we don't need the skill of rote memorization unless we're a doctor or maybe a pharmacist or something like this, right? So more and more, we need to turn towards lighting those fires and allowing people to be artists. Yeah. Interesting
It's also the
question.
chance. It's also the chance that we're giving children to higher education or to go in different colleges, because the grading system, and this is when I'm like geeking out about the data, is that these kids are going to an exam and their results are compared with an average of other people from the past that live different times, that live different ages, that come from a different background. So when you're putting someone that can be, I think a reason why I started this podcast is also to understand my son better. My son is like very different than other kids. He's not into the same things. He's very creative, as you said, likes coding, likes total problem solving. Like, he's very different. And I was very different as well. And for me, it was very hard to navigate because the times that I lived were like, you just have to be prepared to work. And I carry a lot of that in the way I work and in my ethics. And sometimes I exaggerate just because I have that meritocracy thing stuck to my head. And like, I have to climb, I have to go to this path. So I catch myself trying to educate my son that I'm making the same mistakes as my mom. Like, you shouldn't do this. You're not gonna get there. Because he asked me one day, like, why does he have to learn the history that happened so many years ago? Because he would rather learn about the present. So it helps me for the future. And I got stuck. I was like, what the hell should I answer to that? I was like, because you should. And he was like, why? And I'm like, because I learned it too. And he was like, why? And he was like continuously asking me these questions. And it's very hard to answer to questions that kids have these days because you're not ready for them, in my opinion, as a parent. Like, there's some things that they ask you that, for me at least, I feel like I'm not ready because I wasn't prepared for this future. I don't know if I make sense or rambling, but like, this is one of those topics that excite me
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
about
I
how
think
are we grading them.
Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here in terms of averages and metrics have to do with like a flicker device, is what I call it, a flicker device. So it's as the world changes around you, like your monthly budget for your own personal income, or like a
Yeah,
monthly P&L statement for a business. You're doing all of the things and you're living your life, you're running but where do you go back to and look at what's going on? You flicker that model. And then you're like, okay, I need to make these tweaks. So it's a feedback mechanism. But are the metrics that you're looking at relevant to where you want to point yourself in the direction that you're going? And so is your scorecard relevant? So is the average you're underscoring on a history exam relevant to where you want to go in your life? If you want to be a historian, yes, that's a good flicker device. If you want
exactly.
to, you know what I mean? So that's the key. I think where it becomes interesting in my mind is where we use these metrics, or who is using the metrics. So, teachers, parents, academics, and stuff are using these metrics to score and place, where it
Yeah.
really should be the children using the metrics to help define where they want to go. And you think about businesses, the way that businesses are run, legacy businesses, the data is produced so the leaders can make decisions, right? But
Hmm.
that's not the way in modern tech first, experimentation first companies. So Netflix, and which is maybe a bad example today, but other tech first companies like Uber and Facebook and Google and Booking, the leader's responsibility is to get data down to the front lines, so the product owners, the people on the front lines that are dealing with
Make better
customers, are
decisions.
making better decisions. It's a flipped hierarchy. So it's a democratization of the data. So to me,
Yeah.
the interesting part of this question is who is using that Flickr device? Who is using that grade? And it's the kid, it's the child that should be using the grade. And it's not the grade that they're doing poorly on that they should use. It's the one that they're doing well on that they should be using. This is what I need to lean in on more. This is what I should focus. I should keep on going down this route. Forget about being well-rounded. Like, no,
Yeah.
the world doesn't need well-rounded people. It needs people that are spiky and that know themselves and go in those directions, that kind of thing.
I love it because this has to do with that book that we were talking about in the beginning, where you should be put where your strengths are.
Yeah.
Where yeah. So it's a really cool, I guess, parenthesis to that. But like, how can we create a balance, right, between this evolutionary reflexes that we have, the return to the small group thinking, the aversion to foreigners, cultural isolation, like our social empathetic nature, and the multicultural explosive world that we're living today, like how we can make these two love each other.
No, I mean, I don't know on that one. I think that there's constant experiments happening with regards to that globalization, the lack of globalization that we're turning into right now. These are all experiments. My wife is French, so I've got this weird perspective of the country of France, and to me, France is this like really interesting experiment culturally. So France is an experiment against change. They hate change. Like the whole culture, French people hate change. Like Uber, they fight these companies like Uber more than anybody. But at the same time, they have these beautiful traditions because things don't change. Like
Yeah.
you sit down at a Christmas meal with a French family, and oh my gosh, it's so special because they have all of these traditions and it means something. Whereas my family here in Texas sits down with paper plates and barbecue. And it like doesn't mean as much. It's not as poignant and salient, right? So I think that the world, in terms of like balancing, like for example, like what you're talking about, like in group stuff with like identity politics and like how do we I mean, we just have a bunch of experimentation. Every country is an experiment, country alliances and groups and all of this stuff. These are all just weird experiments, and sometimes they fail. I mean, the the
What's a good experiment with the world in this sense?
oh, I think the European Union is interesting. I mean, I'm definitely not a political expert on this, so I'm like stretching out on this question if we're thinking about the world and getting into geopolitics. But
I think it's actually a realistic one as a European, because it is an experiment and it works, because you can see right now the hope that they provide to a country, and like everyone kind of came together to this group thinking. And like, obviously I don't know what's the whole situation. Like, I'm not one of those social media political experts overnight, but I think it's a fair answer. But because you are an experimentation first person, I would like to also ask for a bad example. Like, what's a bad test that we did?
I think it's a hard one because every red light turns green eventually, right? So even like
Sure.
failed weird experiments like can go in the direction of something good, and every green light can lead to red as well. Hitler's thinking was derivative of Charles Darwin's theories, right?
Yeah.
I think that Trump was elected in the US probably because Obama ostracized in sort of this elitist nature. And Obama was elected because George W. Bush was like how he was.
Yeah.
So I think that again, every red light turns to green. So it's hard to say like, I don't know. I'm sure that there's bad experiments out there. I think what Russia's doing is a horrible experiment. I think that that's like there's there's no doubt of like the outcome of this. It's just the only question is of the longevity of the implications of what's happening. I mean, we're in the information age. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's what they're trying to protect against is information, using information, right? Using it, trying to use it as a tool. But I don't see that you can create bubbles like we do with. I don't think that you can create information bubbles like that. So I see that as a kind of a failed experiment for sure.
Oh, it definitely takes the cake for failed experiments. Yeah. So I'm curious because we're talking about the world today. I know you're a fan of mental models. And for me, a mental model basically just means a way of, I guess, thinking better. And I want to know what are some mental models that you've taken or inherited from your academic work and you are using them where you are right now in this position. Like, how does studying animal behavior and evolutionary behavior translate into how we behave online?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think all models are the way that I look at it, a model is a tool, and you can misuse a tool. Like an average is a model, and you can
Yeah,
misuse an average. We talked about that. So I think that any statistic is a model, and I mean, if you think about data, the way to use data, all of those are understanding trends and correlation versus causation, understanding um, that not all data is created equally. There's data that is higher up on the causality ladder, and that's a thing. Pearl's causality ladder, and data that you see is inferior to data that you do, and that's why that's a fundamental model, right? Just right there. Data, big data, analytics data. This is all data that you see, and it's ripe for misinterpretation, for cognitive biases, and
exactly.
stuff like this. Where data that you do still has its problems, but it is solving the joint problem of asking the question and collecting the data at the same time. And this is what experimentation, specifically randomized controlled trials, field experiments, are doing. That is, you're going to get a little closer to mechanisms and to proving theories, testing hypotheses when you're doing that kind of work. So that's a cool one there. I mean, the ones that I use probably the most, though, I have this one mental model that I love. That's a lot of my mental models that I rely upon have to do with like data or this term knowledge, right? Because there's a relationship between data and knowledge in
Of
that,
course.
and there's people have talked about this. I forgot who created this spectrum, but you've got data and then information and then knowledge, and then sometimes you might want to add wisdom to that side of the spectrum, um, but data is like ones and zeros. It's chat replies, it's survey responses. That's data. Information is when you bring it together and maybe you create some codes out of it. And then knowledge is when that's really where the big leap is when you look at all your information and you look for pattern recognition, similarity, dissimilarity, sequencing. You're looking for patterns, and then you're making the leap of like, what does this actually mean? There's two mental models in there in all of that I think about a ton. And that is that, knowing the name of something is not the same as the something. And this is Richard Feynman. And so the name of something is the data and the something is the knowledge. Right. So if you're processing, information, like if you're looking at analytics or whatever, and you're looking at the, behavioral data, you've got some data there, you crunch it into some trends, you got some like funnels that you're looking at or what, but what does that mean? How do you make the data dance? Like, what is the something? Users hate your demo video, like, or whatever. That's the something, right? It's not the data drop off, whatever. That doesn't mean crap, right? So that's a cool mental model. Knowing the name of something is not the something. That the other one related to this that's really powerful is that knowledge equals experience plus sensitivity. And this is where there's a lot here. Like I talk about this in the course where there's
William Blake, I think. Something.
no
William something. It
Vic,
was a
Victor,
William.
Victor Frankl on this one.
Shit.
Man's Search for Meaning. He goes into this, and but what it means is like, I think the analogy that I use a lot is like, you try wine for the first time and you're like, oh, that's crap, I don't like wine. Well, do you know wine? Are you sensitive to it? Meaning, have you tried the breadth of wine over a breadth of like, environments and situations and stuff like that? And I'll hear people like, "Oh, I hate that whiskey." When's the last time you tried whiskey? I was like 10 years ago. I'm like, come on, man! Like you can't like don't have so much convictions. Like so, the sensitivity thing is why we use stats. Is this situation? Is this new version of a website sensitive to a lot of changing environments, right? Sensitive to a lot of people, a representative sample of the population of people going to the website. So that's why we use statistics, is to get an idea of that, of how broadly it is applicable. So the experience part of the equation, knowledge equals experience plus sensitivity. The experience part of the equation is our gut, our heuristic, what we think, our Bayesian interpretation of the world and what makes sense right now. But the stats part is where we bring in the data. We bring in and measure like okay, I've tried like 8 types of Pinot Noir across like a bunch of different ways to taste it or whatever, and I just don't like Pinot, something like that. So
That's the evidence.
there's your evidence. There's your characterization of of the breadth of of how it applies to the environment, so to speak. Yeah.
You just threw a ball to my net right now. So I recorded an episode with Tim Wilson this week. And I challenge him with a question. So I'm gonna challenge you with the same question, Tim. And I have to use like an audio effect. There you go for this. So he talked about correlation and causation. So I'm gonna look for the question. Okay, so he said that causation in analytics is overhyped, and basically,
Oh, you can't. Yeah, yeah. You
and
can't
I
do
so
it.
I'm oversimplifying it, right? But he basically said that while causation, the why, is very appealing to analysts and marketers, because ultimately knowing the why behind buying or consuming or simply taking action would allow us to have a more educated or informed guess about how we can get more people to do that. He said, it's not enough, because like you need to think about an actual sample size of people that have that why, because he was saying that it's like this evidence ladder that he was talking about. I'm not gonna get into statistics because
It's Pearl's
whew,
causation ladder. It's what I talked about, like those
yeah, that's
what you
why I
see
said,
versus
yeah.
what you do. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I said you reminded me instantly. See, this is my German load, cognitive load that has schemas for stuff. But yeah, like he was talking about the exact same thing, and it's crazy because like I came like when I was just doing retention, I was like so. I mean, I love jobs to be done. Don't get it wrong. I love jobs to be done. I think it's an amazing methodology, and I did a lot of work and research there. But at the same time, I was thinking I'm talking to 12 people from 100,000 customers. And just because I want so badly to have that why and test different things, I was just implementing them too fast instead of experiment, like what you said with the wine. I was saying, no, this is it. But I wasn't going through the effort to change my perception and bring evidence to my perception to transform it into a reality. And like it's hard as a marketer because you want so hard to just prove that you're doing something and you're there for the customer, but like it's so like evidence is so important and experimentation is so important, and I just think like sometimes we get so excited about shit that we just do them without thinking. And yeah, like Tim Tim like was going on about the same thing that you said, and I just thought it was cool to connect these moments together. I'm sorry, I'm a geek, and like you guys are so you guys like are blowing my mind. So I want to go back to our topics. I want to ask you, in your opinion and experience, do you think that evolution affects our behaviors?
Yes, fundamentally easy question to answer. Yeah, yeah. So I've referred to this earlier with regards to like the way that we trust people and why we trust
Yeah.
people, because we're evolutionarily predisposed to do so, and that's kind of in our brain. The why, like why we seek shelter, like why we seek sex, why we, these are like what is it, the hierarchy, the pyramid of
Yeah.
needs, the hierarchy of needs, or whatever.
Maslow's.
Maslow's pyramid. Yeah, I mean that is evolutionarily determined, right? Those needs, those what we do. So 100%.
I read some article. I need to send it to you afterwards, and I'll put it also in the footnotes of the episode, where someone was saying that it's a hard no on
Yeah,
this. I need to send you this. This is
it's
I don't
probably
agree with it.
it's probably just usually when, it's just a language thing, right? Like, truth, there's this quote that I really like: truth manifests itself in the relationship between words. And
For sure.
usually we're just using the wrong words, right? And in reality, again, the name of something is not the something. Like I use the word behaviors in a certain way, and it means something, but it means something else to somebody else. So
100%, 100%. So I wanna we're close, getting close to the end, and I ask this question mostly from every guest because I'm trying at the end of this season. I want to write an article about this topic, so I'm using your very ripe brains to write this article. So we touched a bit on this average thing, and like, how do you think people? And this is like not the right or wrong. I'm just genuinely curious on how you think. How do you think people can find themselves and their own individuality, since we're, genetically coded to empathize with groups? For example, like, those psychology tests or personality tests, or like the Myers-Briggs, right? So we are taking that test and we're told we're like a virtuoso, or we're like an analytic, mind, focused person, or we're like a learner, and so on. So we just take those results and then we just define ourselves. But those results, again, are measured against an average of people from, different walks of life and different, backgrounds and so on. But we just like accept something and we just go with it. So like, I want to know, in your opinion, because I'm to blame for that as well. I think no one in this world just, didn't go through this. But like, I want to know from your experience in your academic background and research, because you clearly know more about this than me. Why do you think we do that? Like, why do you think it's so easy for us to just take something and
I mean, it's a story, and we love stories. We're predisposed to really enjoy stories because the stories are what create the trust and the understanding between us, right? The truth manifests itself through the relationship between words, and so we cooperate because of the stories, etc. So it feels good. It feels really good. That's why we like personas, and personas get like the bad rap just as these like pop psychology, personality tests get about, and for decent reason. I'm not a huge fan of them because I don't know what to do with them. They're not a consistent flicker mechanism. They're not something that you go back to and gather information on, and making sure that you're going in the right direction. So whereas if you wrote down daily what you did during the day that you leaned into, that you were excited about, in one column, and then in another column, what did you procrastinate on during that day? And then you keep on writing that every day, and you focus on the first column, and then make sure that that column is there's more and more stuff to do that you love, and less stuff to do that you loathe. Love versus loathe, like, like, just focus on what you love. Like, that's a flicker mechanism. That's something that is, you can create, and like a dashboard even, to make sure that you are going in the direction that speaks to you. And if that makes you, and if you're an analytics person, like I just did a personality assessment, and I'm a persuader. So that's my
I mean,
thing. And
I mean,
yeah, exactly, yeah. So it fits, but what do I do with that, right? Like, what do I do? What does this mean to me? How do I leverage this to make sure that I'm doing what I love in my work?
yeah,
Well, so okay, so let me start that list and start writing down things that I love to do during the day. And I love to like make connections and to sort of dance around people, and make connections within people, and add value by connecting the dots of people and things and numbers and data, and everything. That's what it really I quite enjoy. And I do that a lot with my work as the CEO, and as an account director working with clients, and as a experimentation program manager, which I still am with one client. Connecting the dots, and bringing everything together. It's sort of an orchestration, if you will. That's what I really like lean into. But I got the second column too, the stuff that I loathe, and I just need to not let that column get big, and keep it in check. Because, like, I don't think there's a burnout with work-life balance. I think it's people that are not paying attention to those two columns and the balance of what they're doing just generally with their work. So, yeah.
that gives me a lot to think about, because I really should do this exercise as well, because it's revealing. Because after some time, if you continue to do this, you will see your patterns. and you cannot escape, from those patterns. And then you just have to make sure that you're, putting the balance in the right spot. Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that before.
The
So thank
flicker
you. This is
mechanisms, feedback, frontline feedback. We need data to understand, to make decisions on. We need our own data. It's the same
of
stuff.
course. Of course, yeah. It's like I love this. I'm definitely gonna try to do this from today, actually, because I'm not gonna say tomorrow because I won't do it. Awesome, 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 awesome. I love this. I have one last question for you. It's about Darwin's survival of the fittest. I want to ask you: do you think it's about the survival of the strongest, or do you have another opinion about this Darwin famous
No, it's
quote
definitely not about the survival of the strongest. Remember, I mentioned the variation is
with
the
the yeah.
variation. It's the survival of whoever can best be successful in the new environment. And fittest is actually a biological term. When you have high fitness, it means that you're reproducing really, really well. You're having
Hmm.
children. Your genes are going forward. So that term, survival of the fittest, is very precise. It means more than you might think it means. And it means so you are successful in having babies and passing on your genetics. And you might not be the strongest, but you got lucky with having babies.
That's crazy, and we're like here using it for totally different purposes. And again, just because we know the name of something, doesn't mean we know it. That's something, yeah.
Yeah.
Ben, this was really, really, really awesome. I also want to say that and I want to say this live because I think it's worth mentioning is that as being on the Speero Slack channel just there in silence, I just want to say that your company's culture is one of the most beautiful company cultures I've seen. Like, don't get it twisted, CXL is awesome too. But you guys have like this so collaborative type of energy, and it's like it's filling you with happiness. So I just get there sometimes and just read your little jokes on the Water Cooler channel. But I just think the way what you did and how it feels there, I think it's awesome. And I think more companies should, like we should probably meet and talk about companies culture at some point because I really want to know how you did it. I think it's fantastic, and just wanted to give you that big shout out.
Appreciate it. That's one of my. I'm really happy with our culture. 2020 was a punch in the face to everybody with COVID. We handled it
Yeah.
really poorly, and in 2021 we made just massive moves, and the team around us. I mean, this water cooler trick that we've got. That's Sean David. Shout out to him to bring that to the table. But it's really like the explicit mechanistic approach that I take with our values. So first of all, not having, we have company values and they're not just something written out. We try to create mechanisms that allow us to live our values. And so,
What are those values?
yeah, so the value, and they evolve too. So like they used to be, so the focus and feedback is the first one. Elevate and educate is the second one. Lead is the third. And the fourth used to be smile, which it was a value around gratitude and like nobody likes a Debbie Downer. Don't come to me with only problems, come to me with solutions as
Of
well.
course.
But we have a Slack channel for that. Like in any interaction, people can add an emoji for like a value emoji for like smile, and it will send that message to the smile value Slack channel, which then alerts everybody that someone demonstrated that value. Super cool. It works really well. It's really simple. But the Slack bot asked me to leave that channel. And I was like, okay, that value is not in our DNA. We need to rethink that value. And so I removed that value, and I recently, just this last month, changed it to yes and. We did a big improv workshop for this idea of yes and. There's a principle called yes and. It's the underpinning of all improv comedy, and it has to do with the mentality that you have a plan and things don't go to plan, and we do this new plan, right? And failure, and yes, you're okay with failure, and we do failure at scale as experimenters. It's a really cool value for experimentation and the experimentation mindset. So that's kind of a new one that I use to replace the old one, and I don't know if it's caught on quite yet, but elevate, we get a lot of that when people help each other out. I mean, that gets tagged a ton. the feedback thing, like focus on metrics and focus and feedback that gets tagged, or really good leadership, of course, as well. That's a really kind of common one. But the way that we've got like a show and tell where we force people to lead on topics, and that's a mechanism that forces the value. So these mechanisms that force the awareness of the value, the ceremonies, these rituals that speak to it. This is how I try to get it down into the DNA of the company. Yeah.
It's awesome, and it feels like, again, it's an energy. It's like a, I don't know what's the word for it, like a force field, and it's beautiful. I really really like it, and thank you so much for being here with me today. Where can people find you, follow you?
LinkedIn. That's where I'm most. I'm not really on Facebook. I would like to be a little bit more popular and active on Twitter, but I'm not quite yet. I am there. You can find me there, but I'm not active there. LinkedIn is where I push a ton of stuff. I love that platform for what it does, because it's unabashedly about the work that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so go in the descriptions if you're watching on YouTube, or on the episode footnotes, and connect with Ben. You'll find the link there. And I'm also going to share some of your articles about experimentation maturity, because I think they're very timely for what's going on in the companies, and I think you guys should definitely check them out. Ben, thank you so much for being here today with me.
Thank you, Juliana. We'll talk soon.